Back in 1990, the story of Kimberly Burgala stunned the nation. She was the first of 6 Florida dental patients who said that their dentist had infected them with the AIDS virus. The dentist died of AIDS. Kimberly died, as have 2 of the other patients. All of the patients, claiming they couldn't have gotten AIDS any other way, sued the dentist, his estate, and his insurance companies. And they've collected so far an estimated $10 million in out-of-court settlements. The case made a lot of us worry about going to our own dentists, and it made us wonder about how it could happen. Concerns like these helped launch a national campaign to test all healthcare workers for AIDS, with Kimberly Burgala making an emotional plea before Congress.
I did nothing wrong, yet I'm being made to suffer like this. My life has been taken away. Please enact legislation so that no other patient or health care provider will have to go through the hell that I have.
At that time, I was the chief professional advisor for the largest dental and medical catalog supply company in the world, Henry Schein, Inc. Early in my career, I published books and tapes using my knowledge of the behavioral sciences, including the Overcoming Your Fear of the Dentist program, and for this company, Dentistry in the Age of AIDS. By then, I had published dozens of scientific articles. Because of this case and my background, the company sent me on a lecture circuit between 1990 and 93 when I personally trained nearly 30,000 healthcare professionals in the psychology and clinical practices of infection control. But the government and my employer did not like my research. The controversy I created by publishing reports that conflicted with what officials were saying, based on my use of the FBI's official methods and materials, resulted in my corporate dismissal and blacklisting from lecture circuits of all dental and medical associations. Because of this, you might think I have an axe to grind, or that I'm biased against the government. Some people, especially health officials, dismiss my credibility because I began my career as a dentist, even though I received advanced degrees, one from Harvard University in public health, behavioral science, and 2 more doctorates since then. In short, I have been character assassinated sufficiently to say it is easy to assassinate a messenger. It is a lot harder for intelligent people to dismiss an honest, well-documented message. Hello, I'm Dr. Len Horowitz. What you are about to watch is a documentary critical of the roles national leaders, trusted medical doctors, and the Central Intelligence Agency have played in advancing the war on cancer, the war on AIDS, and now the war on bioterrorism. This controversial program examines the wars in which we have invested from an alternative perspective. The purpose of this film is to help explain how and why we have technologically advanced yet declined in health, freedoms, and quality of life. Currently showing on televisions around the world via satellite is the United States Department of Health and Human Services History of Bioterrorism. This program, featured in a new 24-hour preparedness programming network, was co-produced with the Department of Homeland Security, with the CIA's involvement. It is said to be an educational encouragement to prepare you and your family for threatened, virtually impending catastrophes, especially bioterrorist and nuclear attacks. The network's featured documentary provides the opportunity to critically examine whether or not officials representing our government are telling us enough of the truth to make informed choices impacting life or death. Many critical choices now need to be made. The government explains this for your health and safety. Without honest information, your decisions might literally kill you or your loved ones. That's why this program is so important. This documentary provides honest messages, proven with visible documents, reflecting the most disturbing political and scientific history ever recorded. Controversial as this is, it is also sufficient for your needs to gain a balanced view that government officials are not providing, and be well informed and thereby empowered to make several life-saving decisions that health officials are now encouraging you to make.
There was a turtle by the name of Bert, and the turtle was very alert. When danger threatened him, he never got hurt. He knew just what to do. He ducked and covered, ducked and covered. He did what we all must learn to do. You and you and you and you. Duck and cover.
Be sure and remember what Bert the Turtle just did, friends, because every one of us must remember to do the same thing. That's what this film is all about. Duck and cover. This is an official civil defense film produced in cooperation with the Federal Civil Defense Administration and in consultation with the Safety Commission of the National Education Association.
If you are my age, you might recall during the 1950s and early 60s, school children throughout America were required to brace themselves beneath their desks at schools in defense of a Cold War nuclear weapons attack. I remember as a child how completely absurd this was in the event a nuclear bomb were to explode within 100 miles of my classroom, as I was shown repeatedly the devastating effects relayed by television and movie theater newsreels. The waves of destruction spread hundreds of miles around Ground Zero, leaving nothing but ashes and debris. Only recently did I learn that those civil defense procedures were generated by nuclear weapons industry leaders in collaboration with our elected officials, who pledged this defense of our nation was required to maintain the world's balance of powers, economic stability, and military might.
First, you'll have to know what happens when an atomic bomb explodes. You will know when it comes. We hope it never comes, but we must get ready. It looks something like this. There is a bright flash, brighter than the sun, brighter than anything you've ever seen. If you are not ready and did not know what to do, it could hurt you in different ways. It could knock you down hard or throw you against a tree or a wall. It is such a big explosion, it can smash in buildings and knock signboards over and break windows all over town. But if you duck and cover like Bert, you will be much safer.
This documentary examines the government's latest efforts to get you to duck and cover. It exposes the CIA and puppet politicians operating as prostitutes for multinational corporate criminals, behind whose policies for preparedness lies genocide.
Coming up next, discover how bioterrorism has been used historically and in the present on History of Bioterrorism. And actor Andre Braugher looks back at the biggest flu epidemic in history on Standing in the Safety Zone. Baltimore remembers the 1918 flu epidemic. And what every family needs to know about potential flu pandemic on keeping our children safe and secure. Pandemic flu and emergency safety preparedness. Coming up on HHS Network.
As you are about to learn, the real bioterrorists produce illegitimate programming called propaganda for profit. The real villains are those who spread fear and loathing for financial gain, power, and control.
Come to a place that's new and unique, a place of health, well-being, and preparedness, where connection leads to inspiration and empowerment. Come to AAS. Come to AAS. Come to AAS.
To the extent that populations are being increasingly dependent, virtually enslaved, to drugs, called drug dependencies, the politics, policies, and profiteering of pharmaceutical firms and those who run them is genocidal. Most people realize that wars of any kind make money for arms dealers, industry manufacturers, and stocks, bonds, and futures investors. The wars against infectious diseases and cancers is no different. The war on cancer, the war on AIDS, the battle against breast and prostate malignancies, colon cancers, children's tumors, diabetes, and heart diseases is no different. Many industries and officials thrive off of this sickness. Could all of these declared wars, including the war on terrorism and medically frightening bioterrorism, be part of an economic and political ploy by inside traders or un-American traitors, wielding the mass media for deception? Let's see. In 1963, as the plot to assassinate President John F. Kennedy was being hatched, a global policy think tank met at Iron Mountain near Hudson, New York, to discuss the possibilities for economic sustainability in a world without war. You may have heard it said that money makes the world go round. Well, most intelligent people knew at that time that war economies kept bankers and businessmen most profitable. So the big question asked and answered in the report from Iron Mountain on the desirability and possibility of peace regarded the possibility of transitioning into the 21st century, keeping growing populations manageable and large corporations in business. The participants at Iron Mountain considered the functions of war as necessary for political, economic, and social progress. The functions of war, they wrote, are, quote, essential to the survival of social systems we know today, end quote. Under political requirements, the report stated, a viable political substitute for war must posit a generalized external menace to each society of a nature and degree sufficient to require the organization and acceptance of political authority. In other words, a form of controlled life with threats other than large-scale devastating wars was considered. A way to control populations without destroying expensive infrastructures, roads, utilities, and real estate, as in past world wars. This report provided economic substitutes for war and suggested developing a comprehensive social welfare program and a giant open-ended space research program, both of which we have today. Political substitutes for war included, quote, an omnipresent, virtually omnipotent international police force, end quote. The current global war on terrorism assures this. And fictitious alternate enemies, about which this documentary speaks, is evident in today's focus on terrorism. But who are the deadliest terrorists, really? Do contemporary terrorists seek social control through a, quote, modern, sophisticated form of slavery? Ecological bioterrorism and human genetic destruction was also recommended by the report from Iron Mountain think tank. They suggested a, quote, comprehensive program of applied eugenics, end quote. That means genetically culling and killing perceived social misfits or having them die from environmental toxicity. And the report's cultural replacements in science included, besides space research and social welfare, this concept of eugenic genetic control. In essence, these policy analysts, representing global industrialists, concluded that viable alternatives to traditional warfare could be made available to keep the world's economies going and the burgeoning populations controlled.
It might come as a shock to many people, but the form of government we have in this country today basically is socialistic. We have social programs for everything. We have educational programs to bring the curriculum around to what the national education authorities want. And basically we have a socialist program, but instead of the benefits going to the people, the benefits go to the corporations. Okay? So I think anyone that stops and looks at it would agree that we have socialism geared to benefit the multinational corporations. Now, interestingly enough, this is pushed along by a fervent nationalism. What's good for GM is good for the country, okay? And our country, right or wrong, and we're going to go take our form of freedom and democracy to some other country. If you don't like it, we'll just invade you and occupy you, okay? Now, what does that tell us? That tells us that the form of government that we're operating under today is National Socialism. And that should come as a shock to many people, particularly when you consider that National Socialism in German, shortened down, means Nazi. So, because the Nazi Party was the National Socialist German Workers' Party, National Socialist Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, okay? And so they shortened it to Nazis. And by the way, that was a form of fascism, okay? And the man who coined the term fascism was Benito Mussolini in Italy. But Benito Mussolini himself said that fascism really wasn't the proper term, that it more correctly should have been called corporatism. And that is simply when you have the corporations running the country and controlling the government. Now, this is what we saw in fascist Italy. This is what we saw in Nazi Germany. But the difference is this. In those countries, but before World War II, the state took over the corporations. In the United States today, the corporations have taken over the state. But the end result's the same.
Consistent with the report from Iron Mountain, U.S. government records show a definitive genetics, eugenics, depopulation campaign was well underway by the early 1970s. Here, for instance, is a copy of a National Security Memorandum 200, which called for massive Third World depopulation. This was compiled by request of America's nuclear weapons guru, Dr. Henry Kissinger, the U.S. National Security Advisor under Richard Nixon, overseeing CIA, FBI, and foreign policy.
I want this explained to me now. My Jew boy, Haldeman, where the hell's my Jew boy? Bob!
He's here, Mr. President. I put in a call to him as soon as State sent us that signal.
Thank you. Henry, just what the hell is this?
That, evidently, the State Department has been eavesdropping.
And a good thing, too. How else would I ever hear about what it is you're actually doing around here?
Mr. President, I would never keep anything from you. Surely the day-to-day details of how I achieved the policy.
Henry, we can't have the receivers calling plays the quarterback doesn't know. Is this signal correct?
Well, you see, this is the point, Mr. President. We cannot truly say, not at the moment.
Yes, I can see that, but you know how I hate it when State needles me about you running a secret foreign policy and cutting them out.
Yes, I do, Mr. President. I do.
If you are wondering why we have both nuclear weapons and now biological weapons deployed around the planet, an investigation of Kissinger and Rockefeller is completely condemning. Read along with me this document classified by Kissinger concerning his plan to reduce third world populations. It reads, quote, "There is a major risk of severe damage to world economic, political, and ecological systems, and as these systems begin to fail, to our humanitarian values. The urban slum dwellers, though apparently not recent migrants, may serve as a volatile, violent force which threatens political stability. In international relations, population factors are crucial in and often determinants of violent conflicts in developing areas. And there is no single approach which will solve the population problem. The complex social, economic factors involved call for a comprehensive strategy. At the same time, actions and programs must be tailored to specific countries and groups. According to Time magazine's managing editor, Walter Isaacson, whose biographies include Kissinger, having served the fledgling CIA as a Nazi hunter at the end of World War II, Kissinger was ordered to bring Nazis not to justice in the Nuremberg trials, but to America, to serve in high-level military and industrial positions. Here is the classified document showing his top-secret Nazi exfiltration program was carried out under the code name Project Paperclip. Chief officials in the Nazi Party ran a company called IG Farben. They were contracted with Rockefeller Standard Oil Company to develop rubber and purchase oil to gain the fuel for Hitler's war machine. Chief counsel and intelligence officer for the Rockefeller Standard Oil Company was, at that time, Allen Dulles. Here, from CBS News' award-winning correspondent, Paul Manning, from his timeless text, Martin Bormann, Nazi in Exile, is a photograph of CIA Director Allen Dulles next to IG Farben president and Rockefeller partner Hermann Schmitz. Among Paperclip's Nazis that went to work for the U.S. Navy was Eric Traub and his assistant Ann Berger. In 1951, Traub worked for the Naval Medical Research Institute laboratory in Bethesda. His work with Berger included investigating 40 strains of highly infectious viruses. Eric Traub was Hitler's top biological weapons developer. So America actually inherited Hitler's biological warfare program, and Kissinger knew all about it. 2 decades later, Kissinger was positioned in the Nixon White House by Vice President Nelson Rockefeller, who also appointed Henry to direct the Council on Foreign Relations study group concerning the deployment of nuclear weapons throughout Europe. This is how America came to develop, with the help of Kissinger and the CIA, its modern arsenals of nuclear and biological weapons. It was a sweet marriage between economic and political interests, government and private industry, directed secretly through covert intelligence.
Men wounded in battle we can deal with. But this strange disease. 30 men dead yesterday. 18 the day before. We need supplies. Plasma, penicillin.
We'll get you everything you need, Doctor.
You're Americans.
Now, there is one other official policy to consider as we begin this critical analysis of the United States government's featured program, History of Bioterrorism. A most important policy transition occurred over the past few decades that few people know about and is central to this examination of the government's true history of bioterrorism, disregarded, even censored by officials. Just 2 decades after the report from Iron Mountain was released, and its policies enacted, a policy transition known as the Revolution in Military Affairs occurred. This transition is formally credited to the United States Army's War College that issued a report on this revolution in 1994. But many of its strategies for population control began years earlier, as you can see in this publication from the 1960s. How important is this revolution? The military equated its content to the discovery of gunpowder and the atomic bomb that revolutionized warfare globally. This new type of military action emphasizes warfare, mistakenly called non-lethal. The weapons deployed in this revolution, like cancer viruses, are deadly, but they kill slowly and most expensively through medical management.
This is morphine for the pain. This is for the nausea that I'm going to have.
The constant battle with disease and pain has also left Jim struggling with depression.
God, I hate that stuff.
Being tied to the pill bottle, being nauseous and sick all the time is not quality of life for me. That's not life. I mean, I'm living, but I'm not part of life.
Come on, Jim, relax. Relax.
I don't know whether just to stop all the medications and allow the disease to run its course or to keep fighting. My dreams lately have been reliving my life. Every time they tell me that I'm near the end, I do that.
These non-lethal armaments include the use of toxic biological, chemical, and electromagnetic technologies, including genetically modified microorganisms called GMOs, used to slowly but surely make people sick. Here is where the use of the media, and especially Hollywood, comes in. Critical for the success of these weapons of mass destruction and these secret military operations is what's called command and control warfare, abbreviated C2W. Officials at the War College were very concerned that these new systems of control may run contrary to American values, and that their introduction might be opposed by, quote, unconditioned individuals. So the media has been used to change American values and condition everyone to accept new wars and methods of conducting war. Infusion of psychiatric teachings into American government, academic institutions, schools, and companies. Applied propaganda methods intensively. A specialized part of this revolution in military affairs involved chemical as well as biological weapons. This warfare provides a key for criminal cover, which is called plausible deniability. Experts say the CIA uses this all the time to get away with assassinations and other crimes. Worst of all, no effective cures can be found while the scientific community debates for decades about what is actually causing the many contemporary sicknesses and diseases experts increasingly say are related to this 1-2 punch, chemical, biological intoxication. Watch now as we begin the United States government's version of History of Bioterrorism.
The idea of using disease as a weapon gained a new level of sophistication in the early 1930s as nationally funded research programs on biological warfare were developed. The Japanese had a very active offensive biowarfare research program which included a battalion known as 731. In their program, the Japanese conducted experiments on humans using 15 to 20 different disease-causing agents, with anthrax being one of their favorites. Allied prisoners of war and innocent Manchurian civilians in nearby villages provided an almost endless supply of experimental subjects. When word of Unit 731 leaked to the West, Allied forces began their own programs, concerned that Japan and possibly Germany would gain a military advantage in biowarfare research.
On the third day after exposure, the casualties begin. Dead sheep can be seen further down the line. It is, of course, necessary to confirm that they've died of anthrax.
In 1942, on Greniard Island off the coast of Scotland, the British conducted their first scientifically controlled biowarfare field trials. Scientists exploded anthrax bombs near immobilized sheep to determine if the spores would survive an explosion and retain the ability to infect anyone nearby. Test results showed that anthrax could in fact be effectively dispersed by explosive devices and could also remain viable in the soil for decades. This brought home the realization that if an anthrax bomb were dropped on a city like London, The results could have been catastrophic. Grignard Island was declared off-limits until it was decontaminated in the 1980s. It's now safe for both humans and animals. Like our allies, the United States responded to the perceived threats from Germany and Japan. In 1943, we began an offensive biological program with a modest research and development facility at Camp Detrick, which is now Fort Detrick, Maryland. By the end of the program, we had weaponized a total of 7 incapacitating or lethal human agents, including anthrax. In 1969, Richard Nixon renounced the use of biological weapons for the United States.
Now here is Dr. Joanne Kahn-O from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control, providing several half-truths and even complete lies. The most amazing thing of all is she doesn't even know she is dispensing deception as a propagandist. How is this possible? It's the same for most of the doctors and health officials you are about to meet. First of all, this doctor was selected to perform as a pleasant-looking, obviously intelligent, expertly trained, trustworthy physician, getting paid to read a script. You can assume that while she thinks she is serving the best interests of our nation, all she really knows is what was given to her to read from a script on the left side of her camera. If she was really an expert, not simply made to look like one, she would know after critically reviewing textbooks, congressional records, and several history books on biological warfare that some of her dates are off and all of her information is misleading. Before I evidence these facts, allow me to provide some commentary on how it is possible that Dr. Kahn-O's participation in this C2W PSYOPs could be effected without her even knowing it. Many of you have seen or heard about the movie The Manchurian Candidate.
This is rich people, Manchurian Global, funding bad science.
Raymond Shaw is probably the kindest, bravest
human being I've ever known.
Hypnotized government assassins who, like Dr. Kahn-O here, had no idea they were being used to kill. They are mind-controlled and behaviorally engineered to serve unwittingly military agendas and CIA programs. Medical education relies on many of the same training methods. Medical schools conduct a virtual hazing process they call professional training. After prolonged, intense studies and life and health jeopardizing clinical exposures, medical residents are deprived of sleep, sometimes for days. This form of high-stress, trauma-based education is completely consistent with standardized techniques used in mind control and cult indoctrination programs. This is commonly called brainwashing, but it is really a subtle form of hypnosis that relies on fear and trauma to capture and control your attention and shape your behavior. The end result is you get a heavily trained, egocentric professional that earnestly believes they are operating for the public's greatest good and arrogantly defends their actions based on the limited and limiting science that they have learned. Many people are offended by this egoist attitude in medicine, but few realize it is rooted in the same German psychiatry that proclaimed at the gates of Auschwitz that work makes you free. Unlike most cult followers, however, who know who their leaders are, Dr. Kahn-O here has no idea she is mostly serving the Rockefeller family. She probably never learned that the Nazi Party-partnered Rockefellers monopolized American medicine and public health by the early 1930s. This not-so-gentle redirection of American medicine was largely due to the prostitution of Abraham Flexner, cited by Time magazine as the autocrat of the moneybags. In 1940, Flexner operated for the Carnegie and Rockefeller Foundation's fortunes to extend their medical monopoly. Naturally, these changes in healthcare were said by these profiteers to be in the best interest of public health. But they insisted in quashing all medical competition in the natural healing arts and sciences, including the professions of chiropractic, natural medicine, herbology, homeopathy, acupuncture, massage, essential oils, and most forms of energy medicine. These wealthy industrialists politically contrived their exclusive control over medical education. They exclusively emphasized the most profitable approaches to healthcare. They funded only students, faculty, and academic institutions that served their needs for drug sales and profitability. This is how the pharmaceutical industry assumed its awesome control over healthcare and our lives. Dr. Kano makes other nations, including the Japanese, appear evil for their human rights violations, using Allied prisoners of war and Mongolians for biological weapons experiments. But even a superficial review of history books and medical journals shows America's entities did the same or even worse.
Funding for the health century has been provided by these partners in discovery, who have joined together to mark the centennial of the National Institutes of Health and America's unique partnership of government, academia, and industry for the advancement of biomedical research.
Are these Anglo-American corporations any less criminal than the Japanese military organizations Dr. Kano recalls? And her date is off. It was 1941, according to this text of the United States Congressional Record, that America's biological weapons program began under the direction of George W. Merck, president of the German drug giant, the Merck Pharmaceutical Company. Though many people recall the Tuskegee syphilis study conducted by the United States Public Health Service, infecting 400 black men with the deadly syphilis bacteria, few people ever heard about the Rockefeller Institute's Puerto Rican cancer experiment of 1932 that killed at least 13 innocent people by injecting them with cancer viruses. The Tuskegee experiment victims remained untreated as part of their study until 1972, after which many more died of diseases associated with their infections. Yet, even these damaging experiments paled by comparison to the deaths and disease caused by Merck Pharmaceutical Company's recent release of Vioxx. This harmed millions of people worldwide prior to the company pulling it from the market. So America was by no means lagging behind the Nazis, the Japanese, or even the Russians in administering atrocities, as Dr. Kano leads you to believe. Suspiciously, you can't even read the secret document the government presents here to support its claims, but you can read the ones I'm about to present. Dr. Kano contends that the Dietrich operation was, quote, a modest research and development facility, end quote. In fact, Dietrich's own history recalls it being a large, sophisticated biological warfare testing center. The facility employed some 300 scientists, including 240 microbiologists, 40 of whom had PhDs, 250 specialists in other disciplines ranging from plant pathology to mathematical statistics, and between 700 and 1,000 supporting staff. The operations occupied some 1,230 acres of federally owned land, upon which 450 structures were maintained. It produced annually some 900,000 mice, 50,000 guinea pigs, 2,500 rabbits, and 4,000 monkeys. There was also a large corral area for holding larger animals such as horses, cattle, and sheep. The cost of running Dietrich's biological weapons research alone was reported at $21.9 million in 1969. And here's another fact. By the falsely alleged end of Fort Dietrich's biological weapons program in 1969, there were not simply 7 germs that America had weaponized. Conservatively, there were thousands when you include the bioterrorizing cancer viruses and other germs being cloned, mutated, and mass-produced for global distribution in support of the drug cartel's burgeoning cancer industry. This developing cancer industry really got a shot in the arm back in the 1950s when the first polio vaccines, produced in contaminated monkey kidney tissues containing cancer viruses, were being tested and injected in millions of people worldwide. The cancer virus was later identified as SV40. It was determined to cause cancer in nearly every species it was injected. After scientists and informed industrialists realized these vaccines were going to produce epidemics of cancer, cartel officials within the National Cancer Institute started a special virus cancer program, the SVCP, in 1962, according to secreted documents. Here is simply a partial list of the deadly viruses they created in labs by 1971. These included leukemia viruses, lymphoma viruses, sarcoma viruses, encephalitis agents, genital herpes, Hodgkin's disease, influenza, infectious mononucleosis, Kuru, that is the mad cow disease prion, breast tumor viruses, and much more.
I have decided that the United States of America will renounce the use of any form of deadly biological weapons that either kill or incapacitate.
President Nixon visited Fort Detrick on the 25th of November, 1969. I remember that date quite well because following his announcement of taking munitions and beating them to plowsheds, we all lost our job. And that was a very traumatic experience. But following his presidential announcement on this date, the entire United States offensive program on biological warfare came to a close within 2 years. We destroyed all of our seed stocks. We destroyed all of our production material at Pine Bluff, Arkansas. And we completely got out of the biological warfare business.
Sure, President Nixon renounced the use of biological weapons in 1969 as a political ploy. In fact, here's what really happened. Tricky Dick, as he was called back then, lied. As you can read here from the prestigious scientific journal Nature, quote, by 1970, a year after Nixon ratified the Geneva Protocol, nothing had changed except the public's perception of chemical biological warfare risks. Rather than receive the promised annual cut in biological warfare research funding, the DoD's biological weapons budget increased from $21.9 million to $23.2 million. The stockpiled biological weapons Nixon pledged would be rapidly destroyed remained intact in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. And the announced transition of Fort Detrick from a biological weapons testing facility to a solely defensive NIH-run health research lab had not occurred. So it can be seen that Dr. Kano's propaganda simply reflects her ignorance. Or is it professional negligence? To allege lies are honest truths. Is it unjust or too blunt to conclude Dr. Kano is a professional prostitute for drug cartel-influenced government? Before deciding to condemn me for saying that, or her, listen to the differences between what federal authorities want you to believe versus what leading textbooks on biological warfare has to say about the lacking difference between offensive and defensive biological weaponry. From the point of view of a target population, the notion of an effective defense against such agents is misleading. Neither individuals nor populations can be vaccinated against all possible naturally existing strains and variants of viruses that might be used as weapons. The use of recombinant DNA technologies to alter viruses limits the possibility even against specific strains. In other words, using football metaphorically for what really happened in 1969, many touchdowns in football are made by the defense. Fort Detrick, in fact, scored much more money than it had previously received for offense by shifting programs and players, allegedly, that is, politically, to defense. Biological weapons defenses featured vaccines for which you needed to produce the offensive weapons, the footballs, before you could run the plays for the military-industrial complex. But this defensive, offensive activity, with merely 7 deadly biological weapons at Fort Detrick, was a drop in the bucket. There was a revolution in military affairs taking place at this time. Older biological weapons, methods of culturing and cloning them, mutating germs and mass-producing viruses, even recombining bacteria and viral genetics were being advanced with new biotechnology. So the focus on weapons of mass destruction shifted from simple infectious disease producers to the realm of immunological attackers, using cancer viruses manufactured in labs. These two agendas most heavily featured a new field called retrovirology that included the production of AIDS-like and Ebola-like immune system destroyers for both germ warfare and population control.
We all lost our job, and that was a very traumatic experience.
Who is this grandfather-like figure who tells us he's lost his job? Let me introduce you to America's leading anthrax developer and top-secret CIA propagandist, William Patrick III. Dr. Patrick was not so kind and candid when asked by New York Times reporter William Broad to discuss his CIA contract for Cuba, and later his work upon which the infamous anthrax attack on America was waged.
And that there was interest in using these kind of things that were weapons that were under development, at Detrick, possibly as a contingency, for possible war against Cuba. What can you say about any or all of that?
I have nothing to say about that.
Not a damn thing.
Not a thing.
Yeah.
No.
Bill Patrick wouldn't talk on camera about secret war plans against Cuba, but he's been very forthcoming in his lectures to military personnel, such as this 1999 lecture at Maxwell Air Force Base.
For example, when we were having trouble with the Soviet Union and Cuba, we produced about 3,000 gallons of Q fever and about 2,500 gallons of VEE virus slurry, both liquid. And the concept was, if we got into a shooting wall, that we would spray these organisms concomitantly.
Dr. Patrick, credited as simply being a biological weapons consultant, says he recalls precisely the date of the 25th of November, 1969, as the day he lost his job.
But following his presidential announcement on this date, the entire United States offensive program on biological warfare came to a close.
But Dr. Patrick's little career trauma is discredited by his lie. In fact, this film clip is from 1971, not 1969, and this is important historically. This was the celebration for making Fort Detrick the new home of the National Cancer Institute and headquarters for the greatest, most lucrative war ever, the war on cancer.
Even at its peak, the U.S. offensive program paled compared to the Soviet Union's. The Soviets had a massive, extensive, sophisticated, top-secret program which employed tens of thousands of scientists and engineers in numerous research and production facilities. The Soviets signed the Biological Warfare Convention in the 1970s, and yet their program continued uninterrupted and, in fact, intensified.
In fact, historic records prove the secret intensification of the biological weapons race in America make the Soviet efforts pale by comparison. Here to prove it are 3 of the most stunning and condemning documents in biological warfare history. First is a never declassified congressional record of 1969 showing the Department of Defense requested $10 million to develop, quote, synthetic biological agents for germ warfare, end quote, through the National Academy of Sciences, National Research Council, that is, the NAS-NRC. That's nearly half of the amount of money given to all of biological weaponry that year. These new laboratory creations were descriptively and functionally identical to HIV/AIDS. Mind you, this was 15 years before the contested discovery of the AIDS virus by this man, Dr. Robert Gallo, who, as you will see in a minute, oversaw Litton Bionetics, the Army's 6th leading biological weapons contractor at that time. Bionetics also operated the entire administration of the National Cancer Institute's programs at Fort Detrick at that time as well. This private company was a medical subsidiary of the mega military weapons contractor called Litton Industries. Litton's president, Roy Ashe, was Nixon's alternate for the National Security Advisor post he gave to Kissinger. In consolation, the president made Ashe his White House chief of American business and industry. As Roy Ashe was joining the Nixon White House staff, Kissinger ordered Admiral Zumwalt of the Navy to do a reassessment of America's biological weapons capabilities. The Navy has always been at the forefront of such things. Bioweapons were cheaper to make and could be made to target certain people, even certain ethnic groups. There is no doubt that Fort Detrick's sudden cancer focus was part of a greater depopulation plan. According to congressional records and his biographer, Time magazine's managing editor, Walter Isaacson, Kissinger selected the option presented by Admiral Zumwalt to develop AIDS-like and Ebola-like bioweapons, and the contract went to his White House colleague's company, Litton Bionetics. There is now no doubt that Dr. Gallo officiated the development of these AIDS complex viruses. His group at Bionetics combined leukemia, lymphoma, and sarcoma viruses from various species of animals nearly 15 years before he was credited by the Department of Health and Human Services for having discovered the cause of AIDS, a similar retrovirus. They said this would lead to a cure, an AIDS vaccine within 3 years. It never happened.
Horowitz is one of the many top-dog researchers who is in Vancouver for the International Conference on AIDS. He is Harvard-educated. He has a doctorate in dental medicine from Tufts University in Massachusetts. He's an international authority in public health education, and he's also a prolific author. When Dr. Horowitz first heard the theory that the AIDS virus and other killer germs were deliberately cultured as biological weapons and deliberately targeted at unsuspecting victims, he thought the mere idea mad, some wild conspiracy perhaps, or at least good grist for a sci-fi novel. Somewhere along the way, he's changed his mind. He's presenting his investigations at the AIDS conference in Vancouver on Wednesday, and Dr. Horowitz joins us in our studio. When did you go from thinking this was a mad idea to a possibility?
It took me about 8 months having a document sit on my desk, which was a 1970 appropriations request for $10 million for the development of AIDS-like viruses. And it sat on my desk, and I realized I read it. It said the National Academy of Sciences National Research Council informed the Department of Defense that they could develop synthetic biological agents for germ warfare in 1970 over 5 years for the cost of $10 million. And that led me into investigate whether that document was accurate, whether it was real. And then I began to investigate what happened to the money. And that's what ended up in me finding the origin of AIDS and Ebola.
What do you believe about the origin of AIDS?
What I know and what I'm presenting on Wednesday is that it's a man-made virus. There's no question in my mind these viruses are man-made biological weapons, if you will, or they were developed for cancer research models by National Cancer Institute researchers, people under National Cancer Institute contract, who also were contractors for the Department of Defense. So I know that they were man-made. The question that I leave the readers of my book, Emerging Viruses, and what I'm going to be sharing the information on Wednesday, is that I leave it to you to figure out whether it was an accident, whether these viruses got out accidentally, or whether they were intentionally deployed, as some people would have us believe, or some of the evidence shows.
I managed to catch up to Dr. Gallo at the 11th International Conference on AIDS in Vancouver in 1997. I asked him if he was concerned that some of his experiments might have given rise to the AIDS virus or AIDS virus relatives, that might have contaminated monkeys and chimpanzees shipped by Lytton to the Merck's vaccine division in New York for the production of the earliest hepatitis B vaccines. Here is the exchange Dr. Gallo eventually apologized to me for. He was obviously aggravated.
Do you have any concern that your early experiments in taking simian virus 40 in the presence of simian foamy retroviruses and recombining them with cat leukemia and chicken leukemia sarcoma viruses might have given rise to HIV or its relatives following their culture in human tissues, and that these mutants could have contaminated some live viral vaccines produced in contaminated monkeys and chimps supplied to vaccine manufacturers through your affiliates at Lytton Bionetics?
Quite frankly, I don't know what the hell you're talking about.
I'll cite your paper, Dr. Gallo.
If you can, you've got a paper. You've got a paper that I don't know I ever published.
Okay.
I sure like you to cite it. Would you begin?
I'd be happy to. National Academy of Sciences, 1970, Gallo et al. It was an oral presentation that you presented before NATO and NATO audiences in Mol, Belgium. You published it. It's in the National Academy of Sciences. I'll be happy to show you the paper.
Stop. I mean, this is beyond asinine. In Mol, Belgium, my first trip to Europe, so I can remember it, a NATO meeting did take place. NATO meetings fund all scientific meetings all over the world, even East-West at that time. Biologic meetings, scientific chemistry meetings, all kinds of meetings. Meetings about motherhood, fatherhood, everything. And when I talked about in Mol, Belgium, it was in the 1960s, long before gene cloning took place, before I ever worked in virology. What I talked about was cellular transfer RNA. Okay? And that's Mol, Belgium. Proceedings in the National Academy of Science on SV40, I never published a paper in my life on SV40, except the transfer RNA species. In SV40 transformed hamster cells compared to non-transformed cells as a control. You've got pineapples, kiwis, grapes, and cherries mixed in with some other tutti frutti. I don't know what in the hell you're talking about.
And excuse me.
I'm a little bit tired of this kind of nonsense.
Okay.
Crap.
And Gallo, Sarin et al. Were Lytton Bionetics researchers were your co-authors in which you combined cat leukemia and chicken sarcoma viruses to create to evaluate the leukemia sarcoma complex models.
I'm really smart. Yes, we did it. Everything was created by us working in the laboratory. Look, just for those with some little bit of understanding of this, who care about this kind of idea, I've had a lot of things said, but I've never had anything quite like that one. There were people who thought and made postulations that, and it was not actually directed at me, this is a good one, a new one, but that HIV could have been created in laboratory experiments. There are two answers to that are definitive, conclusive, that no scientist could have deliberately created them unless he was a super genius and 10 years ahead of his time. The AIDS virus definitively existed long before molecular cloning. That's point one. Point two, we know the full sequence, the genome of HIV. It was published by our lab in 1985 and by a group from Paris around the same time. The genome has no homology to any known existing virus in the world, except SIV discovered after it. Has nothing to do with cats, has nothing to do with chicken sarcoma viruses. SV40 is a DNA virus that comes from little animals that can transform cells in culture, has no sequences in HIV. Further, we never worked with SV40 with those viruses together, and if we did, the whole thing would be irrelevant. And I think you need to begin with Biology 101 high school, okay?
These documents, including the U.S. government contracts, best explain how AIDS emerged on two far-removed continents in black Africans and gay New Yorkers by 1978. These were precisely the populations that received the first hepatitis B vaccines produced in Lytton's chimpanzees just 4 years earlier. By the way, the man sitting to Dr. Robert Gallo's right is Dr. Jonathan Mann. At the time, Dr. Mann was the AIDS czar for the World Health Organization. Not long after Dr. Mann witnessed my exchange with Gallo, he quit his most esteemed position, saying, quote, far more than a medical problem, AIDS is a socio-political imposition, end quote. If I am right, and these documents are legitimate, then generally trusted vaccines, the sacred cow of public health, given mostly to our nation's youth, said to have contributed most to conquering infectious diseases, are alternatively the world's worst curse and nightmare. The third and final document in this stunning sequence comes from the same National Cancer Institute and National Public Health Service report. Here is the historic account of American biologists and virologists transferring the most sophisticated bioweapons of mass destruction to Soviet scientists during the Cold War. Even though, as Dr. Kano accurately states, the Russians were developing their biological weapons programs at rocket speed. These documents provide conclusive evidence that the NCI's molecular biologists, including Dr. Robert Gallo, traded America's most advanced secrets in bioweapons production with precise methods and materials for cancer induction, genocidal weapon preparation, and bacteriological and virological bioterrorism with their Russian counterparts and others during the Cold War.
We had developed a fairly effective biological weapons program, but the Soviet Union, exploiting the revolution in genetic engineering and molecular biology that happened in the 1970s and 1980s, went 10, 20, 30 years beyond what we ever achieved in the sophistication and lethality and variety of biological weapons.
In laboratories like this one, Vector in Siberia, Soviet scientists were able to use modern biotechnology to combine traits from several organisms into one, even to create entirely new diseases unknown to nature.
There's a guy named Sergei Popov who did this research for a long time for the Soviets, and you know, what he did was scary. He scares himself, and yet at the same time, you see, when you talk to him, you see him still fascinated. You know, he can't help himself. You know, it's like Oppenheimer and the atom bomb. You know, it's so technically sweet. Well, you talk to Sergei, and he is still infused with this sense of possibility. You know, gosh, if I just took one from column A and one from column B and one from column C and put them together in a new way, eureka, you know, what, you know, crazy things could we concoct? And some of them are crazy. Some of them are terrifyingly crazy.
I was in charge of a relatively large team, the biggest team probably in the history of the Soviet Union dealing with synthetic DNA.
Sergei Popov is now working in Virginia under a U.S. Defense Department contract to do biomedical research.
Right now we protect people from biological agents, but in the former Soviet Union we've developed for more than 15, 17 years, we've tried to develop more dangerous biological agents. The process is quite similar. It could protect people and it could be used to create more dangerous biological agents.
Popov is now studying how to help the human immune system fight disease. But as a bio-warrior, he turned the immune system into a killer. He did it with genetic engineering.
So these are bacterial cells. They are ready to take up new genetic information which is encoded in plasmid DNA.
A plasmid is a small ring of DNA found in many bacteria. This DNA provides instructions for certain traits, including production of toxins or resistance to antibiotics. Each trait is encoded in a segment of DNA called a gene. This clear liquid contains gene fragments.
So we mix this small amount of DNA with cells.
Using techniques developed since the 70s, scientists are able to take genes from one organism and transfer them to another. If done properly, the inserted gene will take up residence within the DNA of its new home. In this demonstration for NOVA, Dr. Popov transferred an animal gene, one that makes a sea anemone red, to a colony of bacteria, which turns red in the process.
Essentially, we've used the same technique in the former Soviet Union to create new biological weapons, new biological agents with essentially new properties and higher virulence.
In the Soviet Union, Popov isolated a gene that produces the protein myelin, which helps conduct nerve signals. He extracted the myelin gene from a small mammal and inserted it into the bacteria that causes Legionnaire's disease.
One of his projects at Oberlinsk was to take Legionella, this sort of mild flu bug in humans, and make it worse, right?
It's better to say it's mild pneumonia.
Mild pneumonia, yes,
yes,
like flu-like pneumonia, yeah.
It's pneumonia-like symptoms, yeah. And the agent which incorporated new genes was capable to induce absolutely new symptoms, which resembled in animals multiple sclerosis.
Exposed to Popov's genetically engineered bacteria, rabbits became ill with Legionnaire's disease. Then something strange happened. Their immune systems attacked the myelin around their own nerves, as if it were an invading pathogen.
The majority of animals died of unusual symptoms because pneumonia went away. At the time symptoms developed, there was no bacterial agent inside the animals.
So if you were, a physician trying to figure out what happened,
that would be impossible to find any kind of disease.
No trace.
So the animals were completely healthy, but several weeks later, it's better to say 2 weeks later, first symptoms appeared, and those symptoms were severe paralysis and final death.
The terrifying thing for me as a science reporter is that, he turned this theory of bad bugs, of designer bad bugs, and made it real.
Knowing, for example, that American military labs created AIDS, the Russian military and Soviet media had a field day and the opportunity to produce this comic. This was widely circulated in Russia during the 1980s. Here, American biological weapons contractors working for the National Cancer Institute are depicted exchanging a test tube full of AIDS viruses with a U.S. military officer who pays cash for the bioweapon.
Our worst fears were confirmed in 1979 when an accidental release of anthrax occurred at a biological research facility in the town of Sverdlovsk. Much of our recent knowledge about their joint military and civilian program comes from a Soviet defector, Dr. Ken Alibek, formerly known as Dr. Kenachin Alibekov. He was the deputy director of Biopreparat, a cover organization for the civilian bioweapon and production facilities.
Meet the CIA's leading bioterror propagandist, who, along with our Grand Dr. William Patrick III, officiated the development of the world's deadliest anthrax.
Dr. Ken Alibek is a Soviet Union weapons defector who provided much information about the biological weapons programs in his country. He has indicated that his country and the United States held similar studies trying to engineer tularemia strains that would be resistant to antibiotics and vaccines.
Since his defection to America, Dr. Alibekov, alias Ken Alibek, has authored numerous articles and even a book to spread, like this government film, propaganda and bioterror. In essence, he is a pawn in a global war game featuring fear and educational indoctrination along with terrorization of the population.
Although we had suspected for years that they had continued their offensive program, some of the information he provided was a real wake-up call for the United States. Prior to the Gulf War, the intelligence community suspected that the Iraqis had done research on anthrax, but they didn't know just how extensive their program was. So as a precautionary measure during the war, about 150,000 U.S. service members were vaccinated against anthrax. And more would have been immunized if the war hadn't ended so quickly.
Dr. Kano lies again here when she said that prior to the Gulf War, the intelligence community suspected the Iraqis had done research on anthrax. This is a lie, because the intelligence community did not suspect this. They absolutely knew it. How did they know? Because the U.S. Commerce Department licensed the transfer of the anthrax to Iraq by the American Type Culture Collection, a company shown here, and a copy of Senator Don Riegel's Congressional Investigation Report of 1995. Listed here are just a few of the many varieties of biological weapons shipped to Saddam Hussein during the 1980s. So all that controversy about the CIA providing false intelligence about the Iraqis developing weapons of mass destruction is hereby shown to be a fraud and cover-up.
Active chemical munitions bunkers, mobile production facilities.
We know he's got chemical weapons. He's got them. He's got them. He's got them.
He has not developed any significant capability with respect to weapons of mass destruction. He is unable to project conventional power against his neighbors.
We are able to keep arms from him. His military forces have not been rebuilt.
You get told things every day that don't happen. It doesn't seem to bother people.
In fact, every member of Congress knows quite well that the CIA's intelligence was accurate. They are obviously avoiding self-incriminating discussion about this evidence proving an American-based, multinational, corporate-controlled organization shipped Saddam Hussein all these weapons as published in the United States Congressional Record. These pages of war provisions clearly prove the profitable supply of deadly germs sent to three places: the Iraq Atomic Energy Commission, the Ministry of Higher Education, and the Ministry of Trade. More evidence of malfeasance comes from the Qamishiyya weapons arsenal in Iraq. Saddam Hussein's army did have biological and chemical weapons of mass destruction that were shipped from the heartland of America.
I never received, before, during, or after hostilities, any report of Iraqi use of chemical weapons, nor the discovery of or destruction of Iraqi chemical weapons.
However, a little bit later in his testimony, General Schwarzkopf apparently contradicted himself when he said the following.
I remember General Franks came to me, and I assume it was Qamishiyya he was talking about at the time, because it was about the same time frame, and talked about this huge ammunition dump that they had found with literally tons and tons and tons of ammunition in it, and there was no way they could possibly retrograde it, and I challenged him on that, and he convinced me that no, they couldn't retrograde it, and therefore they were going to destroy it in place. I said, fine. Now that's Qamishiyya. From what I heard about the size of the bunker that Franks was talking about and the others that they blew up, these were huge bunkers with crates and crates and crates and crates of ammunition in them, and I can only assume that they either didn't recognize them or didn't see them at the time.
I'm Dan Topolsky. I was the Nuclear, Biological, and Chemical Defense NCO for B Company, 37th Engineer Battalion. I was on the Qamishiyya Bunker Complex mission.
Sergeant Topolsky was one of the nuclear, biological, and chemical non-commissioned officers in charge of identifying munitions at the Qamishiyya Bunker Complex in Iraq. This complex consisted of over 100 bunkers and 49 warehouses, each the size of a football field. And he feels that he and his men were exposed to chemical and biologicals when they were ordered to blow it up. Here's how he felt when he entered this complex.
I felt betrayed. I felt like we had been sold out for dollars when I saw what I saw inside those bunkers.
Why would Sergeant Topolsky feel betrayed? What was it that he saw when he and the others from the 37th Engineer Battalion entered those bunkers? General Schwarzkopf discussed how the enemy identifies their munitions in his testimony when he said the following.
Even though I had 40-some years in military service, if you were to bring in a bunch of ammunition and pile it up in front of me, and one of them was a 122-millimeter rocket with chemicals in it, I would not be able to tell you that that had chemicals in it, particularly if it was an Iraqi rocket with Arabic writing on it or something of the sort. We identify ours when we had them in a very specific way by color coding. I don't have the slightest idea what the Arabs did.
General Schwarzkopf stated that we identified ours when we had them by color coding. As you can see, the colored bands on these munitions indicate that there were chemical and biological munitions inside these bunkers at Camisea. According to Sergeant Topolsky, the yellow or purple bands indicate chemical munitions, where the green bands indicate biological munitions. Schwarzkopf also indicated that he could not identify munitions, particularly if they had Iraqi markings on them. You'll also note that the markings on these munitions are plainly written in English, and they indicated that these munitions were supplied to Iraq by countries like Jordan, Middlesex, England, the Soviet Union, or Russia, as well as the United States of America. According to the 1972 Geneva Convention, weapons of mass destruction are illegal. Therefore, according to Sergeant Dan Topolsky, it is very likely that these munitions were destroyed not so much to prevent Saddam Hussein from regaining control of them, but rather to destroy the evidence of these countries breaking international law.
This footage was widely distributed by Gulf War Veterans Association President Joyce Riley, a nurse and captain in the reserves at that time, who published it for the world to see to help stop the killing. Captain Riley, who was never biologically or chemically exposed to fallout during the Gulf War, is certain she was infected when forced to take the anthrax vaccination. The anthrax vaccine given to all of our troops and allies, except for French soldiers, was poisonously prepared and deadly to receive. Let's listen again to Dr. Kano, to what she has to say about this vaccination business.
As a precautionary measure during the war, about 150,000 U.S. service members were vaccinated against anthrax, and more would have been immunized if the war hadn't ended so quickly.
These numbers are plainly wrong. There were hundreds of thousands more Americans victimized by the vaccines. Numerous experts have now linked the anthrax vaccine to hundreds of thousands of deaths and a currently advancing plague that emerged exclusively from the Gulf War called Gulf War Syndrome. The Senate thoroughly investigated this subject in 1994 and published proof that our troops were unwittingly used experimentally or alternatively targeted for disease and death by the vaccine makers with official political consent. Spreading across America and the world now is a flu-like illness that resists standard medical treatments. You probably know people suffering with severe recurring respiratory ailments. Experts have linked to an agent called mycoplasma. In fact, chronic fatigue, low body temperature, and a flu that keeps coming back is associated with this germ isolated and patented by the United States Armed Forces Institute of Pathology in a patent shown here. This agent, mycoplasma, apparently contaminated the anthrax vaccine given to more than 500,000 American troops that served in the first Gulf War. Dr. Kano from the Centers for Disease Control applauds this invention. This next government document was obtained by lawyers for the victims I just described. Here you can see the array of biological weapons being tested on the prisoners in Texas as overseen by Baylor College of Medicine. Baylor, at that time, boasted having George H.W. Bush serving on their board of directors. The dates listed here also coincide with the alleged transition of America's offensive biowarfare program to defensive. Notice the mycoplasma. Both defensive and offensive studies were conducted, a vaccine study and a hall study in which prisoners were actually exposed to this airborne agent in a meeting hall. According to congressional testimony by one of the nation's leading experts in mycoplasma and Gulf War syndrome as it relates to mycoplasma-contaminated vaccines, Dr. Garth Nicholson, these Texas studies linked to Baylor College of Medicine as well as the privately owned biotech company called Tanox Biosystems of Houston, a company, incredibly, co-owned by James Baker III, the man charged with overseeing the president's Florida vote recount that secured his heavily contested election. Here is a copy of Dr. Nicholson's letter to an investigating official. It reads, quote, Mycoplasma fermentans incognita strain, an unusual organism that had been found previously in some AIDS patients, by Dr. Shai-Ching Lo of the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology in Washington, D.C. We did not realize at the time that Dr. Lo had previously been employed at Baylor College of Medicine and Tanox Biosystems in Houston, a privately held biotechnology company that had been named in Desert Storm veterans lawsuits filed by Collard and Pitts, among others, as one of the companies that illegally sold biological weapons to Iraq. Dr. Nicholson, previously the chairman of cancer research and full professor at the University of Texas in Houston, went on to report how he was persecuted and academically blacklisted following his attempts to serve the public's health. Contrast this nightmare Dr. Nicholson lived through with Dr. Kano's matter-of-factly and incorrectly claiming the vaccinations given to troops were immunizations. In fact, for the sake of accuracy, evading for the moment the use of vaccinations to make people sick, the use of the two terms, vaccinations and immunizations, have been successfully confused by the government and industry propagandists. Immunizations and vaccinations are not the same. Vaccinations typically cause hypersensitization reactions, including allergies, asthma, autoimmune diseases, and with contaminants such as mycoplasma or frequently inoculated herpes-type viruses such as the Epstein-Barr virus, cancers can be triggered. Immunizations, on the other hand, are caused by natural exposures to foreign proteins that challenge our immune systems. The confusion persists simply because health officials and professionals acting as propagandists like Dr. Kano want people to believe that vaccinations prompt natural immunity, which they do not. With all vaccinations, whatever desirable sensitivity occurs against germs comes with great risks of side effects. Just read their package inserts, or a physician's desk reference, or Google search them to learn more about this sad truth. Now let's examine the source of the anthrax that Dr. Kano says woke us up to just how dangerous anthrax can be. According to experts investigating the anthrax mailings, this frightening attack and serial homicide was done with the help of America's own anthrax specialists, exclusively the two people Dr. Kano has introduced you to, Dr. William Patrick III and his CIA sidekick, Dr. Lebikov. How would I know this? I was the first science analyst to offer the FBI help in the case of the mysterious anthrax mailings. I began alerting officials 2 weeks prior to the media's first reported mailing. I was alerted by years of anthrax research and 2 segments of the ABC News with Peter Jennings, the nights of September 26 and 27, 2001. Jennings ended his Wednesday night broadcast saying, quote, "Tomorrow, we're going to cover anthrax. We're going through your fears, one by one, day by day. Good night." Thinking this peculiar, and having done extensive research on the anthrax vaccine, I tuned into Thursday night's program, which turned out to be a virtual infomercial for Cipro. The Bayer Company was on the verge of bankruptcy, they said, prior to the broadcast. Their Cipro sold for more than $700 for a 60-day supply. Peculiarly, the FDA had made this poorly tested, highly toxic antibiotic the only endorsed method of treating anthrax. That was bizarre, because most doctors realized you could treat anthrax far less expensively with many other antibiotics. Bayer's infamous connection to IG Farben and the Nazi Rockefeller biomedical biowarfare cartel concerned me, so I contacted the FBI. Consistent with the nefarious connections between government investigators and drug industrialists, the FBI refused to respond to my urgent warnings and later pleas. The anthrax mailing operation, including the media's coverage of the mailings, sent Bayer stock soaring and approximately 30,000 people in the nation's capital alone to their local drugstores for this potion. Within 6 months, nearly 90% of those frightened people suffered brain damage, in many cases irreversible. This was reported in the Washington Times, The story by investigative journalist Kelly O'Meara was published in the paper's Insight magazine. By October 12, 2001, the FBI had posted a $1 million reward for valuable clues in the anthrax mailings mystery. It took the FBI 6 months to respond to my relentless communications. Then, rather than awarding me anything, even a simple thank you, FBI agents were dispatched to interrogate me as a suspect. 2 months after I urged the FBI to investigate Bayer and the sole anthrax vaccine maker, Bioport, LLC, the Washington Post reported that the Bureau was pursuing the possibility that financial gain was the primary motive behind the mailings. Washington Post writers Susan Schmidt and Joby Warwick reported on December 21st that the FBI was probing at least 2 military-industrial contractors that shipped the specified mailed anthrax powder. The first was the Army's Dugway Proving Grounds, and the second was the Battelle Memorial Institute, BMI, a sort of one-stop shopping mall for everything military. BMI is allegedly a nonprofit CIA and military contractor involved in vaccine acquisitions and development. It also administers and supplies bioweapons facilities at Dugway Proving Grounds, including their main aerosol germ testing structure they euphemistically call the Life Sciences Building. Based on extensive evidence, BMI appeared to be the only anthrax supplier staffed with the resources, human and otherwise, capable of producing the hyper-weaponized anthrax that was mailed. BMI developed a specific AIM strain of powdered anthrax that was twice as concentrated as anything the Soviets had ever produced. Plus, it was electromagnetized to spread easily and rapidly. This work was done under a top-secret CIA bioweapons program an anonymous Pentagon official called Project Jefferson. William Broad of the New York Times twice reported this project was named Clear Vision. I telephoned William Broad after emailing him for months. We spoke of Battelle's labs in West Jefferson, Ohio, as a leading institutional suspect with ties to the drug cartel and the anthrax vaccine maker, Bioport. BMI also administered the U.S. military's Joint Vaccine Acquisitions Program, a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. Extensive efforts were being made before and after the mailings to get governing officials to approve of a $250 million anthrax vaccine purchase from Bioport. Meanwhile, congressional investigations had proven Bioport grossly negligent in vaccine quality control. The sole supplier of anthrax vaccine was completely untrustworthy, according to congressional records. The private Bioport company was directed by a wealthy Saudi with banking and suspected terrorist ties, as well as military and presidential ties through U.S. Ambassador to England, William Crowe, a retired Navy admiral. Crowe and friends evolved the company in association with Britain's primary biological weapons testing organization at Porton Down. In other words, Bioport was an American profit-making venture spun from a British government-directed war supplier. The Washington Post reported that the FBI learned about, but evaded, the BMI CIA defensive project. This, despite the fact their bio-warfare contract involved a precise strain of anthrax that was mailed. So what's really going on here? The press and the FBI were aware that Battelle had contracted with the CIA operative and anthrax expert, our good old Grand Dr. William Patrick III, to prepare a report approximately 2 years prior to the anthrax mailings on what this precise germ's capability and lethality would be if mailed. This would not have been done unless someone in that organization had not foreseen its use in the very way it was used, for bioterrorism, to generate fear and financial rewards.
Freedom and fear are at war. The advance of human freedom, the great achievement of our time and the great hope of every time, now depends on us. Our nation, this generation, will lift a dark threat of violence from our people and our future.
This reality check implicates our government's most powerful intelligence agencies in a conspiracy to commit murder, treason, military-industrial sabotage, and bioterrorism, a profitable media-supported form of genocide. In summary, Dr. Kano's primary expert testimony for this history of bioterrorism comes from the two men most suspiciously linked to the deadly anthrax mailings. No other suspects would be so capable, nor high-tech hardware available to them, to bioengineer this hyper-concentrated, electromagnetized, and silica-sensitized mutant that would spread, carry, and kill far better than anything the world had ever seen. Next, let's return to Dr. Kano, who will inform you about becoming enlightened to the risk of dying from a bioterrorist attack without being frightened. Her mixed message is allegedly provided to prepare you for such an attack by visiting the government's propaganda mill at www.ready.gov. Here you are given simple preparedness instructions that include buying prepaid calling cards. Then it's time for a commercial break. Watch these commercials that especially target black people. Health officials justify targeting African Americans with their messages more than whites due to increased diseases among blacks. But there's a lot more to this story, as you will soon learn.
In October of 2001, the United States experienced anthrax attacks using powder sent through the United States Postal Service. 22 people got sick and 5 people died from this attack. We learned just how dangerous anthrax could be. But there are things we can do. The best defense against a bioterrorism attack is knowledge and preparation. The webpage ready.gov is a good resource for preparedness information. It can be found at www.ready.gov. Visit this webpage for detailed guidelines, facts, and what you can do to be ready in the event of an emergency. A small amount of time spent becoming informed, developing a plan, and preparing yourself against terrorist threats now can prove to be invaluable should the need arise. Don't be afraid. Be ready.
My mom made the decision for them to be screened for colon cancer. Grandpa! They found polyps, and they were able to remove them before they developed into cancer. Beautiful. When I see my daughter with my father, I feel grateful that he's here.
Spin doctors for the CDC and their propaganda ministers are very skilled. They know precisely what moves people to act. In this commercial, it is simply love of life and family. So I wonder if your family values include this: National Security Memorandum 46, a specific genocidal campaign administered by the CIA to target black nationalists and other opposition groups, not terrorist groups, in America. This was an extension of what the FBI's assignments were under COINTELPRO, directed by J. Edgar Hoover. Were these programs simply part of Kissinger-Rockefeller population policies aimed at sustaining white supremacy, generating class warfare, controlling working class numbers, and squelching effective black activism? This is, after all, why modern genetics began at Cold Spring Harbor Labs in New York, affiliated with Rockefeller University. They called this population control movement eugenics. Indeed, eugenics was pioneered and funded by the Anglo-American ruling elite, the old money families, the wealthiest industries directors, and yes, even the Bush family was represented here by Prescott.
Has Strughold arrived?
Yes. They're waiting in the library, sir. We began to worry. Some of us have traveled so far, and you were the last to arrive. While we've been made to wait, we watch surveillance tapes which have raised more concerns.
More concerns than what?
We've been forced to reassess our role in colonization by new facts of biology which have presented themselves.
The virus has mutated.
Into what?
A new extraterrestrial biological entity.
My God.
The geometry of mass infection presents certain conceptual re-evaluations for us about our place in their colonization.
This isn't colonization. This is spontaneous repopulation.
Eugenicists' primary reason for funding population planning and genetic engineering was to control ethnic and black populations that potentially pose threats of popular uprisings and labor revolts, as further detailed in Kissinger's National Security Memorandum 200. The controllers of politics and profits are not stupid. They were aware of, even boasted, advances in biotechnology on the cutting edge of, quote, cancer research, and, quote, instead of the politically risky objective of population control. For such a kind and gentler nation, sourcing from 1,000 points of light, here is a compelling revelation. A public biological weapons experimentation license granted by the United States Congress to researchers under contract with the military intelligence organizations, including the CIA and DARPA. All that's required to conduct offensive biological warfare experiments on you or other people without informed consent is the secret notification of Congress in a classified report along with a civilian official sworn to secrecy. In this way, believe it or not, any military or intelligence agency or even one of their private corporate contractors can transmit a deadly disease or create a devastating outbreak without the media or public ever finding out. The CIA tested a variety of germs alleged to be safe on the public in San Francisco, New York, Pennsylvania, and elsewhere throughout the 1950s and 1960s, as shown here. As detailed in the U.S. Senate report from 1976, this report heavily condemned the targeting of black people and their political organizations, especially during J. Edgar Hoover's reign over the FBI and the COINTELPRO campaign. Now you can better understand how and why the infamous Tuskegee experiment came to be. Now you know why the health agency that conducted Tuskegee now brings you terrorizing propaganda in the form they call history of bioterrorism.
Scientists nervously wonder what might happen if the deadly virus mutates and goes airborne, like the flu.
Disasters like floods, fires, and earthquakes can be devastating, but you can take steps to keep your family safe. Get an emergency supply kit. Make a family emergency plan and practice it together. Be prepared for the different types of emergencies that could happen in your community.
Man has used organisms found in nature to kill or disable his enemies since the Middle Ages. One of the earlier examples occurred in the 14th century when the Tartar army laid siege to Kaffa, a walled city along the Black Sea. When an outbreak of bubonic plague began to ravage the Tartars, they decided to catapult the plague-ridden corpses into the city, thereby helping to start an outbreak within the walls. Shortly thereafter, the Genoese defenders within the city were stricken with plague and fled to Italy. They carried this infection with them to Europe, beginning the outbreak of the horrible Black Death, which decimated the European population. With our current knowledge of the epidemiology of plague, we know that fleas leave a body quickly after it cools. Therefore, it's most likely that the outbreak was actually spread in Kaffa by flea-infested rats, which were already within the city.
What you have just heard Dr. Kano tell of the old Great Plague is the truth with modern implications. Here's the lesson. Major epidemics and outbreaks are always linked to major socio-political upheaval. Today, our cancer and AIDS pandemics, explosive diabetes and heart disease rates, obesity poisonings, and even recent avian flu frights are all man-made, politically contrived, and financially triggered and sustained. These are socio-political impositions, not nature's curses. When you gain your intelligence from mainstream news sources, this mainly results from news tips or press releases generated by people or companies in business aiming to make a profit from each fright. This best explains the vast majority of biological threats to which Americans have become sensitized or terrorized by mainstream news sources, without regard to the millions of Americans who are already disabled and depressed or phobic. Consider the avian flu fright. It appears to have largely benefited Donald Rumsfeld. Besides directing the Department of Defense, few people recall his position as CEO of Cereal Company, maker of NutraSweet, the poisonous sugar substitute, controversially approved by the FDA, along with the first oral birth control pill. Rumsfeld chaired the board of Gilead Sciences, Inc., initially a small company that developed and now licenses Tamiflu to the drug giant Hoffmann-La Roche. Tamiflu is the only government-recommended treatment for an epidemic that hasn't happened yet. The fight over the avian flu sent Rumsfeld's cronies' stock soaring. Other examples of white-collar bioterrorist attacks include several alleged E. coli outbreaks, meat packaging company takeovers, and SARS. Vast industries are built, company takeovers occur, or competition is destroyed by death threats and terror campaigns.
The Japanese Imperial Unit 731 operated in the 1930s and 40s when Japan was mobilized and ready for war. General Shiro Ishii, mastermind of this terrible program, had a mission to turn illness into weapons of murder. Ishii was particularly fascinated by plague because with plague, a biological warfare attack could present like a natural epidemic. Person-to-person spread could then produce disease out of proportion to the original amount of agent used. The Japanese were unable to disseminate plague by either aerosol or in the water supply, so they used nature's vector for spreading the disease, the common flea. Ceramic bombs loaded with infected fleas were dropped over several cities in mainland China, causing large outbreaks among their population.
The old Japanese military was not the only ones growing plague and other dangerous bioweapons, risking severe outbreaks. Numerous experts say that besides Germany's bio-warriors coming to America, the U.S. inherited all of Japan's bioweapon secrets following World War II, including a dangerous germ originally called Kuru. This agent, on the 1971 list of National Cancer Institute studies, is believed to have come from the Japanese experimenting on Aboriginal people in New Guinea, who, modern spin doctors, made a big deal about their being cannibals. They blame the cannibals for this disease's spread. But cannibals did not spread this agent to the National Cancer Institute. Carlton Gajdusek did. This Nobel Prize winner and convicted pedophile is credited for having isolated the Kuru agent, now renamed a prion, and responsible for mad cow disease, called Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease in humans. So you see, as this National Cancer Institute document shows, what started in Japan, settled in New Guinea, and then expanded in America to what is now another worldwide plague. The risk of these and new genocides emerging is multiplied by what is ongoing throughout America today in some 113 university, government, hospital, and corporate laboratories. Here, the global elite are engaged in biotechnology research with potential to be used for germ warfare. Most alarming, these labs operate secretively, contrary to federal rules. From California to New York and Chicago to San Antonio, often in major population centers, biological warfare labs are financed today by nearly $20 billion in government grants. These labs are literally crawling with germs advanced militarily. Reportedly, in many of the laboratories, security is lax and safety procedures are inadequate to protect the public from sabotage, theft, and periodic outbreaks. Now, Grand Dr. Patrick is going to tell you the truth about this gravest risk of all, outbreaks stemming from laboratory activities. Listen here.
Plague is attractive as a weapon because it generates fear, it spreads easily, and it kills very quickly. The United States offensive program did some research on plague, but it was never fully weaponized in this country. We could not overcome the challenge of maintaining virulence when it was grown in large quantities.
It's a weapon that, you know, it's a contagious agent, and we felt that in retrospect that we had enough problems controlling an aerosol under meteorological conditions that can change without having an organism that is so contagious so that, you know, you're not able to control where that organism might end up. It might come back to bite you, not only bite your forces, but some of your friendly allied forces also.
Well, what about civilian forces? The risk and damage to the general public from cancers, for instance, caused by our own trusted biotech labs operating throughout the United States, is more severe, untold, and unimaginable. Numerous recorded outbreaks have foreshadowed what this government propaganda is really intended to relay. That you can expect a deadly outbreak sometime soon, whether you are prepared for it or not. And terrorists, not our biologists, will be blamed. And what does the government expect you to do? Number one, get vaccinated. They are spinning or pinning responsibility for prevention and security on you to take their profitable, risky, and other deadly vaccines. Instead of telling the truth and breaking ties with special interests, our politicians are turning blind eyes to serial slayings, mass murders, and have set nearly everyone up to be ill or killed. If you find this disturbing or hard to believe, so does everyone who first comes across documentation like this demented experimental creation. Here from the National Cancer Institute, how would you like to have airborne leukemia viruses circulating in your community? You have no assurance that it hasn't already happened or that a release isn't planned. There's a lot of talk about avian flu. This is the cancer flu. The laws regulating the potential release of such agents don't really protect you anymore from experiments like this.
You're telling me there's another outbreak?
Yeah.
Besides the one in Boston?
Look, I don't understand why you're reluctant. The CDC and SAMR are the only two agencies capable of dealing with a virus like this. That's why I want to get out of here tonight. They need all the help that...
Sorry, Sam. Can't do that.
Billy, why in God's name would you keep me out of there?
It's a civilian matter, Sam.
That's bullshit.
CDC is on it. Let them do their job. Oh. Besides, we don't have a charter.
Oh, fuck the charter, Billy. It's not about a charter. People are dying. It's about you being a doctor. It's about that sacred oath that we took, remember? Billy, we've been friends for 20 years.
Yes, we're friends, Sam, but I'm also your boss. I run this outfit. It's not run by committee. You do what the hell I say do. I'm your boss. I have my boss. Is that clear to you?
Yeah, get your boss on the phone. Call up McClintock. Tell him to put me on a plane before the two of you kill a lot of people.
Colonel, I'm going to suggest that you shut up now before you say something else you're going to be sorry for. And don't forget who you're talking to.
Well, tell me who I'm talking to, because I don't know who I'm talking to anymore, Billy. Am I talking to you, Samrid, the Pentagon, the CIA, fucking McClintock, Dugway? Tell me who I'm talking to.
This conversation is over.
Can you tell me who I'm talking to?
You're on a plane to New Mexico this morning. I suggest you go home and get packed. Or do whatever you have to do, Colonel, and I suggest you do it now.
And what do you do about it? When it happens, simply follow official instructions from people likely behind these outbreaks? Here are the official recommendations you are told to heed from the Department of Homeland Security. In fact, they're happy to send you this propaganda for free. Mind you, the subtitle to their book is An In-Depth Guide to Citizen Preparedness. Yet most reasonable people who read these recommendations find them far from comprehensive or comforting. Getting vaccinated against a bioweapon not yet known to exist and not yet released is not prudent or even reasonable. Nor is it likely people will bear the time and expense to install, according to official recommendations, HEPA filters in their homes to keep infectious germs out. Rather than in-depth, most intelligent, well-informed people would conclude these recommendations are insane.
Before the discovery of the smallpox vaccine, smallpox was in fact used as a weapon. One of the best documented examples of this occurred during the French and Indian War. The British had been defeated in their attempt to conquer Fort Carillon on Lake Champlain, so Sir Geoffrey Amherst, commander of the British forces, met with Indians who were sympathetic to the French. Under the pretense of friendship, he deliberately offered them blankets previously used by smallpox victims. The Indians, who lacked immunity to smallpox, suffered a devastating outbreak of the disease. The English were then able to successfully attack the fort, which, by the way, was renamed Fort Ticonderoga. Military forces have also been devastated by endemic smallpox. During the siege of Quebec, George Washington's troops suffered massive losses from smallpox. He subsequently required all new recruits to be inoculated against the virus. It's incredibly ironic that the great public health triumph of eradicating smallpox in the 1970s and the discontinuation of worldwide vaccination have opened the door for this virus to be once again used as a weapon.
Contrary to popular belief generated by similar propaganda, the smallpox vaccine did little, if anything, to reduce smallpox worldwide. A great expose on the sham of smallpox vaccinations was developed by members of Vaccination Liberation Organization, spearheaded by Ingrid Cassell-Harkins. It was called Smallpox Alert and is still available online at www.vaclib.org, along with many other informative articles. Given their conspiracy to corner the market, the smallpox vaccine was being touted by the same officials and private industry interests that promoted the anthrax vaccine. Think about it. With so many other biological weapons from which to choose, why would federal officials only decree the need to purchase these two risky and hurried vaccines? Because these inside traders held the opportunity to profit wildly
from these vaccines exclusively.
HHS Secretary Tommy Thompson at that time collaborated with the profiteers to make the smallpox vaccine required for every American, beginning with healthcare workers and emergency responders. As the Smallpox Alert explained, this vaccine dated back to the 1950s. It had been diluted 5 times. There was no scientific justification that it was or would be effective against any modern form of genetically engineered smallpox. Happily, most scientists, nurses, and medical doctors did not go along with this ruse. The consensus proclaimed that mass smallpox vaccination should not be encouraged. By the way, if you still don't question this as medical madness or murder, just remember, smallpox vaccines are made from cow pus. If you think getting injected with a 60-year-old formula containing cow pus as the active ingredient will protect you from smallpox, perhaps you should...
Ebola strikes fear in the hearts of people who hear the word. Movies have been made about the dreadful outcome of becoming infected with Ebola. But it's just one of several deadly hemorrhagic fever viruses that can be used as a weapon against mankind. There are many types of viruses in the world, some more deadly than others. Some viruses cause mild colds, while other viruses cause severe illness and death. The viral hemorrhagic fever viruses are of great concern. These viruses cause internal and external bleeding in people who get infected. Viral hemorrhagic fever is caused by 4 families of viruses. They include Ebola, Marburg, Lassa fever, yellow fever, and a few others.
Dr. Kano is right. Ebola and hemorrhagic fever viruses have been the subject of much Hollywood filming and bioterror hype. Let me show you where these viruses really came from and who, in Hollywood, is leading the propagandist attack on the public's mind.
You know, Colonel Daniels is not going to like us going behind his back like this.
And we'll kill him. Lighten up, Billy. We have no alternative. You're so goddamn sentimental. That's the trouble with this country.
Sir, the micrographs are ready.
They are ready.
Our African friend is back. We have to be very careful now, Billy. We wiped out a whole camp to keep this bug secret. Right. Look it up. Shelve it. You know about this. I know about this. Nobody else. Get your friend Daniels off the case. I don't want that nosy little bastard messing up 30 years of our work.
The mother of Ebola is the Marburg virus that first broke out in 3 vaccine production facilities in 3 different parts of the world simultaneously in 1967, killing 7 people and injuring another 31. This grave risk came from the fact that the monkey supplier, Lytton Bionetics, was also a leading biological weapons contractor for the military and the CIA by 1969. With military and White House influence, no one would dare declare Bionetics' negligence and liability in any outbreak. Listen now to the voice of the world's leading vaccine expert, Dr. Maurice Hilleman, chief of the Merck Pharmaceutical Company's vaccine division, relay this problem he was having with imported monkeys. He best explains the origin of AIDS, but what you are about to hear was cut from any public disclosures.
And I think that vaccines have to be considered the bargain basement technology for the 20th century.
50 years ago, when Morris Hilleman was a high school student in Miles City, Montana, he hoped he might qualify as a management trainee for the local J.C. Penney store. Instead, he went on to pioneer more breakthroughs in vaccine research and development than anyone in the history of American medicine. Among the discoveries he made at Merck are vaccines for mumps, rubella, and measles.
Tell me how you found SV40 in the polio vaccine.
Well, that was a Merck thing. Yeah, I came to Merck, and I was going to develop vaccines. And we had wild viruses in those days. You remember the wild monkey kidney viruses and so forth. And I finally, after 6 months, gave up. I said that you cannot develop vaccines with these damn monkeys. We're finished. And if I can't do something about it, I'm going to quit. I'm not going to try it. So I went down to see Bill Mann at the zoo in Washington, D.C. And I told Bill Mann, I said, look, I got a problem. I don't know what the hell to do. Bill Mann is a real bright guy. I said, these lousy monkeys are picking it up while being stored in the airports in transit, these loading, offloading, loading. He said, it's very simple. He said, you go ahead, get your monkeys out of West Africa, get the African green, bring them into Madrid, unload them there. There are no other traffic through there for animals. Fly them into Philadelphia, pick them up. Or fly them into New York and pick them up. Right off the airplane. So I brought African greens, and I didn't know we were importing AIDS virus at the time.
And it was you who introduced AIDS virus to the country. It was you who introduced AIDS virus to the country. It was you who introduced AIDS virus to the country.
Became a real story. Became a real story. Became a real story.
Mert will do to Velvex. Mert will do to Velvex. Mert will do to Velvex.
So what he did, he brought in, we brought in those monkeys. Now we had those. And this was the solution. Because those monkeys didn't have the wild viruses. But we had all of these...
Why didn't the greens have the wild viruses since they came from Africa?
Because they weren't, they weren't being infected in these group holding things with all the other 40 different viruses.
But they had the ones they brought from the jungle, though.
Yeah, they had those, but there were relatively few. What you do is you have a gang housing, you're going to have an epidemic transmission of infection in a confined space.
Oh, is that the problem?
So, anyway, the greens came in. Now we had these, and then we're taking our seed stocks to clean them up, and God, now I'm discovering new viruses. So I said, Judas Priest. Well, I got an invitation from the Sister Kinney Foundation, which was the opposing foundation, and that was the live virus.
Oh, right.
Yeah, they had jumped on Saban's bandwagon. They had asked me to come down and give a talk at the Sister Kinney Foundation meeting. And I said, it was an international meeting. I thought, God, what am I going to talk about? I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk about the detection of non-detectable viruses as a topic.
There were those who didn't want a live virus vaccine. They concentrated. The National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis concentrated all its efforts on getting more and more people to use the killed virus vaccine, while they were supporting me for research on the live virus vaccine.
So now I got to have something, you know, that's going to attract attention. So I thought, gee, that damn SV40. I mean, that vacuolating agent that we have. I'm going to just pick that particular one. That virus has got to be in vaccines, and it's got to be in Sabin's vaccine. So I quickly tested it. Sure enough, it was in there. And
I'll be damned.
So now, so I go ahead and.
So you just took stocks of Sabin's vaccine off the shelf here at Merck?
Yeah, well, that had not been made at Merck. It was made at Merck.
You were making it for Sabin at this point?
Yeah, it was made before I came.
Yeah, but at this point, Sabin is still just doing these massive field trials.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
In Russia and so forth. So I go down, I talked about the detection of non-detectable viruses. I told Albert...
But at this point, Sabin is still just doing these massive field trials.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
In Russia and so forth. So I go down, I talked about the detection of non-detectable viruses. I told Albert, I said, listen, Albert, I said, you know, you and I are good friends. But I said, I'm going to go down there and you're going to get upset. I'm going to talk about a virus that's in your vaccine. Now, you're going to get rid of the virus. Don't worry about it. You're going to get rid of it. But, so of course, Albert was very upset with me.
What did he say?
Well, he said basically that this is just another obfuscation that is going to upset vaccines. And I said, well, you know, you're absolutely right. But I said, we have a new era here. We have a new era of a detection. And the important thing is to get rid of these viruses.
Why would he call it an obfuscation if it was a virus that was contaminating the vaccine?
Because, there are 40 different viruses in these vaccines anyway that we were inactivating. And...
but you weren't inactivating the kids, though.
That's correct. No, that's right. But yellow fever vaccine had leukemia virus in it, and, you know, this is in the days of very crude science. So anyway, I went down and talked to him, and I said, well, why are you concerned about it? I said, well, I'll tell you what. I said, I have a feeling in my bones that this virus is different. I don't know why to tell you this, but I've been around biology a long time. I just think this virus may have some long-term effects. And he said, what? I said, cancer.
I love it. I love it. Go ahead.
No. I said, Albert, I said, you probably think I'm nuts, but I just have that feeling. Well, in the meantime, we have taken this virus and put it into hamsters. So we had this meeting, and that was sort of the topic of the day, and the jokes that were going around was, gee, we would win the Olympics because the Russians would all be loaded down with tumors. This is where the vaccine was being tested. This was
right.
So, and it really destroyed the meeting. You know, it was a big international.
Yeah, right.
So it was sort of the topic. No. Anyway.
Was this the Cancer Society meeting in New York?
No, this was the Sister Kennedy.
Oh, it's Sister Kennedy, right.
And Del Becco got up and said that he foresaw problems with these kinds of agents.
Why didn't this get out in the press?
Well, I guess it did. I don't remember. We had no press release on it, obviously. You don't go out. This is a scientific affair within the scientific community. This is a scientific affair within the scientific community.
An historic victory over a dread disease is dramatically unfolded at the University of Michigan. Here, scientists usher in a new medical age with the monumental reports that prove the Salk vaccine against crippling polio to be a sensational success. It's a day of triumph for 40-year-old Dr. Jonas E. Salk, developer of the vaccine. He arrives with Basil O'Connor, head of the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, which financed the tests. Hundreds of reporters and scientists from all over the nation gather for the momentous announcement.
It was too much of a show. There was too much Hollywood. There was too much exaggeration. And the impression in 1957 that was no, in 1954, that was given was that the problem had been solved, that polio had been conquered.
But anyway, we knew it was in our seed stock for making the vaccine. That virus, you see, is 1 in 10,000 particles is not inactivated by formaldehyde. It was good science at the time because that was what you did. You didn't worry about these wild viruses.
So you discovered it wasn't being inactivated in the Salk vaccine?
Correct. So then, the next thing you know is 3-4 weeks after that, I found that there were tumors popping out of these hamsters.
Despite AIDS and leukemia suddenly becoming pandemic from wild viruses, Hilleman said this was good science at that time. So imagine what bad science might yield. Science directed for profit and population control by the military, medical, petrochemical, pharmaceutical cartel. But the biggest bestseller, The Hot Zone, by author Richard Preston, was different. Extremely dishonest. Author Richard Preston was paid by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, among the cancer industry's largest benefactors, intimately tied to the Rockefeller family's influence, to present easily proven deceptions. Preston reported that Ebola emerged from bat guano at the bottom of a deep, dark cave in southern Sudan. The fact is, this is very close to where Lytton Bionetics' labs operated, testing these precise agents on native Africans. Here, for close examination, is the exact experiment administered by Lytton Bionetics in 1965 and ending in 1970, precisely timed for the first Marburg virus outbreak. This NCI document refers to John Landon, chief scientist at Lytton Bionetics, overseeing the experiment. Notice that at least half of the rhabdovirus simian-infected monkeys died or were transferred. The ones that lived were transferred to the vaccine production labs for vaccine production. This is how the first Marburg virus outbreaks occurred. Since that time, every single Marburg virus outbreak, as well as Ebola virus outbreak, has either been associated with a bioweapons lab accident or an intentional release for terrorism's objectives, political or financial gain. But not according to America's leading outbreak journalist, Laurie Garrett. In her bestseller, The Coming Plague, she neglects Lytton's links and dismisses the CIA biological weapons contributions to these outbreaks as though she, too, were on the Rockefellers' payroll. It should be noted that these unnaturally evolved, man-made viruses are far less genetically stable. They are more fragile. They mutate more rapidly than naturally evolved viruses. That's why when the second Marburg virus outbreak occurred in southern part of Uganda in 1975, many scientists suspected foul play by the CIA, since the genetic sequence of the 1975 strain was essentially identical to the 1968 strain. The only explanation for this fact remains refrigeration. From my perspective, the least trustworthy bioterrorist in Hollywood is CIA operative Steven Seagal. This propagandist and egomaniacal opportunist produced the movie The Patriot at my expense, merging emerging viruses, AIDS and Ebola, and my third bestseller, Healing Codes for the Biological Apocalypse, into one screenplay. Instead of professionally crediting me, Seagal falsely credited the last Canadian for his information. Seagal boasts of his CIA alliances. In The Patriot, he spun my character together with an admitted CIA operative named Larry Wayne Harris, who I exposed in the late 1990s as a bioterrorist threatening the public's health. Harris was later arrested for acquiring anthrax spores.
Everything changed on December the 7th, 1941, with the attack on the U.S. Navy at Pearl Harbor by Hitler's Japanese allies. Now, instead of telling Hollywood to keep quiet, the U.S. government began pushing them to fulfill their duty and make patriotic war movies.
The motion picture industry today is supplying without charge all its newest and best feature films
to the U.S. War Department Overseas Film Division.
The movies were a tremendous propagandistic tool during this time. They set up camps for the soldiers to come back in where movies were shown 24 hours a day because that impressed the soldiers with what they were fighting for.
It was the beginning of an unprecedented alliance between Washington and Hollywood. While 6 million Jews died in Europe, their kinsmen in Hollywood were churning out patriotic movies that helped galvanize the Allies to defeat Hitler.
Calling the House Un-American Activities Committee to order, Chairman J. Parnell Thomas of New Jersey opens an inquiry into possible communist penetration of the Hollywood film industry. The committee is seeking to determine if Red Party members have reached the screen with subversive propaganda.
To the Mogul's surprise, powerful men in Washington saw Hollywood's patriotism as nothing more than thinly disguised communism. Now, at the height of their success, the Hollywood Jews watched their dream fall apart.
The question of communism is in no way related to this inquiry, which is an attempt to get control of the screen and to invade the basic rights of American
Chairman, Mr. Chairman.
To invade the rights and privileges and immunities of American citizens, whether they be Protestant or Methodist or Jewish or Catholic.
Mr. Lord.
All right. My beliefs, my affiliations, with the American public, and they will know where I stand, as they do from what I have written.
Stand away from the stand.
For Americanism.
Stand away from the stand.
Have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
Have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
Your purpose is to use this to disrupt the motion picture industry, to invade the right not only of me, but of the producers, to their thoughts, to their opinions, and this I will not permit.
No. The statement of a real American.
To appease UAC, the Moguls instituted a blacklist of studio talent. Years before, they had fled European anti-Semitism. But now in America, they became collaborators, helping anti-Semites rid Hollywood of Jewish intellectuals. In effect, they had surrendered control of the industry. The Moguls are gone, but their vision survives. The America of Edison and Rankin has given way to an alien ideology. It isn't the communism or Judaism that the Gentile elite once feared. It's Americanism, as defined by Hollywood. The icons endure. The little guy fighting the odds, the pogrom imagery, the desperate desire to survive, and the various races assimilating to create the ultimate happy ending.
I'm not Jewish. Nobody's perfect.
A white middle-class president articulating the Jewish experience writ large. A new global religion, Hollywoodism.
Perhaps it's fate that today is the 4th of July, and you will once again be fighting for our freedom. Not from tyranny, oppression, or persecution, but from annihilation. We're fighting for our right to live, to exist.
There was a Hollywoodism then, there's a Hollywoodism today. I would go further and say it is what is the ruling ideology of our culture. Hollywood culture is the dominant culture. It is the fantasy structure that we're all living inside.
With this background, you can be more discerning about the propaganda you receive from Hollywood.
This program has been brought to you by the United States Department of Health and Human Services. You're watching HHS, the Health and Human Services Network.
If a natural disaster happened and we were outside the home, we would probably all meet, I'll say, around the grocery store, you know.
We would all meet at a bus stop. That is our meeting place.
Well, we would probably just meet out in front of the house.
Oh, we'd probably meet at our neighbor's house.
If you have no plan, then you can just plan what to do as it happens.
Come to a place that's new and unique, a place of health, well-being, and preparedness, where connection leads to inspiration and empowerment. Come to HHS, the Health and Human Services Network, a 24/7 commercial-free resource for high-quality health and emergency preparedness information from the world's leading experts whenever and wherever it's needed, at home, at work, on the air, and on the web. HHS, the Health and Human Services Network.
So if the goal is to reduce excess populations, as Foreign Affairs Journal advertisement says, we need more wars, including our government's war on terrorism. We need to inject more people, especially black people, with infectious diseases. This is why this image of a needle inserted into a vial of vaccine is said to be synonymous with preparedness and the positive virtues of inspiration and empowerment. Why they show flu vaccine vials rolling off the assembly line and equate the vaccine as delivering, quote, high-quality health. Why they plug CIA agents as so-called health experts, like Dr. Anthony Fauci. Why they say the HHS will be there for you in an actual emergency, just like they were there following Hurricane Katrina. Why they need to reinforce, reiterate, and convince you that they are an accurate and reliable resource, when it is precisely that which they are not. Why they show life's riskiest profiteering in genetic engineering and biotechnology as a trusted partner in good health, and why they inject a happy black woman for especially emergency preparedness and beckon you to come to their paradise. In conclusion, the new unprecedented risks we now face as a nation and world bring us to the brink of annihilation. This prognosis includes possible extinction. The motives underlying our own destruction include greed, ignorance, generalized fear, and malice against other nations and people, as shown in this persuasive propaganda. As this program ends, I pray you are better able to make choices consistent with accurate intelligence and wisdom. Take Dr. Kano's advice. Study the government propaganda on their information sites, recalling what you have learned here. Each of us needs to make a critical choice. Either we awaken to the truth that shall set us free, or dismiss the truth and increase our risk of dying early. It was once said that ignorance is bliss. Consider carefully who might benefit from your ignorance and who might be harmed. Give me an S. S. Give me a C. C. Give me an A. A. Give me an M. M. What's that spell? Scam. What's that spell? Scam. What's that spell? Scam. That son of a Bush needs your help again. He's got us all in a terrorist jam. When Daddy said chemicals off to old Saddam, so don't roll up your sleeves of vaccines in your arm. They don't tell you that they're doing you harm. And it's 1, 2, 3. What are we fighting for? Most people know it's a scam. Next stop is old Baghdad. And it's 5, 6, 7. Open up the pearly gates. Well, we've got no mind to question why we're all gonna die. Now prepare yourself, generals, for the big blast. India and Pakistan are heating up fast. Why you should go out and kill their pets, cause the only good Taliban is one that's dead. They say global peace can only be won if they bless us all the kingdom come. And it's 1, 2, 3. What are we fighting for? The clueless just don't give a damn. Where the hell is Pakistan? And it's 5, 6, 7. Open up the pearly gates. Well, with Prozac minds, we don't care to know why. We're all gonna die. Now, come on Wall Street, don't be slow. Why, man, this is war, so go, go, go. There's plenty of big fortunes to be made. The supplying the Chinese with the tools of the trade. Just hope and pray that if they start the bomb, they'll drop them on Osama bin Laden. And it's 1, 2, 3, what are we fighting for? The clueless just don't give a damn. Like if you all get old, sit down. And it's 5, 6, 7, open up the pearly gates. Well, we've got no minds to question why. With you, we're all gonna die. Take it hard. Throughout the land, pack your boys off to old Baghdad. Come on, fathers, don't hesitate. Send your little girls to before the wedding day. Be the first ones on the block to have your kids come home in a box. And it's 1, 2, 3, what are we fighting for? The clueless just don't give a damn about the oil in Afghanistan. And it's 5, 6, 7, open up the pearly gates. Well, the Rockefellers say the population's too high, and half of us need to die. So come on, all you dumbed-down men, that son of a Bush needs your help again. He's got us all in a terrorist jam. House and Daddy's partner, old Saddam, so don't roll up your sleeves for any shots in your arm. It's smarter to stay on the farm, that's all.